Hello, everybody. I just want to remind you when this meeting is starting that we are recording this meeting online and it will be published on the internet. Okay, over to you, Nita.
Great, thank you, Mike. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Community Forum with the Westford Police Department. This event tonight is co-sponsored by First Parish Church United of Westford and Indivisible Westford, and Westford Cat is broadcasting this live and recording the forum for later viewing. My name is Anita Ton Kang Nguyen, and I'll be one of your facilitators for the forum. Joining me as facilitators are Emily Gilstrap with Indivisible Westford and Tom Clay with the Action for Social Justice Committee from First Parish Church. Although Tom Clay and I are both on the select board, tonight we are acting and speaking as private citizens and not on behalf of the board. So we've got a full agenda for the next hour and a half, and that includes a discussion with the chief and deputy on the top 3 questions we've received from the community. Then we'll hear some personal accounts. We'll also get a high-level overview of school resource officers, a topic that we know has been gaining a lot of attention with families. And finally, we'll have an open question and answer time before wrap-up. If at any time you'd like to submit a question, please feel free to use the question box in the top right corner of your screen. We do have folks monitoring the questions coming in, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can, but we may not be able to get through all of them. However, we do plan to send on questions to the WPD after tonight's forum for follow-up. Answers will be shared on the website westfordjustice.org. You can also submit a question to westfordjustice@gmail.com at any time. So we're joined tonight by Chief Tom McEnany and Deputy Chief Mark Chambers, as well as a full slate of town leadership. Everyone who signed the statement from town leadership on George Floyd is here and listening and showing their support for having a conversation on this issue. That includes police, fire, select board, town manager, school committee, and the school superintendent. Tonight's forum focuses on increasing understanding about the police department. But as we all know, race is a community-wide conversation, and the police is just one part of a larger discussion that we're embarking on as a town. We've received over 100 questions from the community, and we know that there will be more. And I hope that as we talk, listen, and understand more, ideas and volunteers will come forward to move us to action and solutions as one community. So now I'd like to introduce Chief Tom McEnany and Deputy Chief Mark Chambers. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And Chief, before we get started with the questions, I wanted to open the floor to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for hosting this forum. This has been some pretty trying times for our country in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and the COVID pandemic. I hope this forum helps educate our community about our department, the hard work our members do day in and day out. And I feel it's important to have these discussions and be open about these issues and concerns our residents may have. I hope it helps to build trust and confidence in your department. A little bit of background of our department, where the Westford Police Department is an accredited agency. We've been accredited since 2005. We're the 18th department in the state to receive the accreditation, which is like the gold standard for policies and procedures in that area. Accreditation incorporates best practices with regards to policies and procedures. Every one of our policies has been reviewed by assessment teams to ensure we have the necessary standards and we qualify for accreditations. These policies include use of force, identification and prevention of racial and gender bias prevention. Our department also gets inspected every 3 years. Once this social unrest began, we felt it was imperative that we post some of these policies on use of force and racial bias, and we were one of the first departments in the area to do so. We received a lot of positive comments by doing that. And another key issue is we were voted one of the safest communities in the state and one of the safest communities by one organization in the country. I'd like to say that I'm proud of the men and women of our police department and how they carried themselves as police professionals, especially over the last couple of months. What happened in Minnesota was wrong. That was police brutality. The officer was charged with a crime and is being prosecuted. Even though that crime took place in Minnesota, we are feeling the effects here in Westford. Over the last couple of months, your officers, many of whom are residents of this community, have been subjected to verbal attacks, have been purposely coughed on, and recently had a bottle thrown at them from the top of an apartment complex while investigating a motor vehicle accident. And I personally have a member of my family that has received several messages that say, save a life, kill a cop. This is unacceptable for us. Your officers do an amazing job in this community, protecting this community, and they should be treated like they shouldn't be treated like they've done something wrong. Remember, these are residents of our community too. They have children that attend our schools. They should be commended for their professionalism in their profession, and they should be celebrated for their commitment and dedication. One thing that I do want to say is nothing is going to be done on these issues unless we all work together. And I think this is an important step on addressing this issue, regardless of how you feel about policing. We're still going to answer your calls for help and service, because that's what we do. I want to take this opportunity to thank our officers for their service and the families for their support. I also want to thank the many in our community for all the support, the well wishes in our business community that's really stepped up and recognized our officers for the job that they have done. And we really do appreciate your support. With that, I'm going to open it back up to you, Anita, and whatever questions, I have it.
Anita, I'm helping to monitor the questions and the hand raises. I think it may make the most sense, Anita, if we go through the first questions that you have prepared with the chief, and then we take a look at the questions we've received and address them then, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, so if you're out there, I do see your hands, I do see your questions, and we'll try to come back to them as best we can. We've got a big audience tonight, which is terrific. But we'll proceed with the questions that have been prepared first. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. So our first question relates to the general makeup of the Westford Police Department. So there have been a lot of questions from the community about diversity within the Westford Police Department. And can you tell us a little bit about the makeup of the workforce?
Sure. The department demographics, we have 48 full-time police officers, 2 officers of color, 2 females, and that's the demographics. But most importantly, I think it's important to note that these officers are hired from within our community. The majority of them are. So out of the 48, 40 of them were once Westford residents, and 40 of them, so 83% of them are Westford residents. So they do come from our community. 23 are currently residents of with our town. So these officers that you see on the street, the majority of them come from families from within our community.
And can you talk a little bit about your current efforts and activities for diversifying the police force?
So we're kind of, the way that it works for our department in the hiring process is through civil service. Civil service is a matter of law. It's under Chapter 31, the Civil Service Law of the Commonwealth. And what it does is it provides members in our community to take a test, a civil service test, a police entrance exam. They take an exam if they're interested in becoming police officers, and then we get the grade. If we have one position in our police department, we can only take 1 out of the top 3 candidates on the list, and the list is graded by grades. Or you could have somebody that appears on the list that has veteran status. So they would actually go up to the top of the list, or disabled veteran status. So there is a formula that's used by that. Some of the issues that we do have and some of the tough issues that we do come across is what we're seeing in our recruitment efforts is we have, I believe, I think there was over 13 officers that are eligible for retirement right now. And we only have about 13 residents on the list. And out of the residents that were on the list, only 6 signed for the last opening. So not too many people want to become police officers now. And it's a trend throughout the state. And a lot of departments are having a hard time recruiting and retaining police officers.
And is there anything that the community can do to support those efforts with recruitment?
So what we have been doing is just reaching out to people, anybody that has interest. Several of our interns that we were just hired from our recent hires were all Westford Academy students that went to college, majored in criminal justice, and they served as interns. And we've developed that intern program through the Westford Academy, and we're really cultivating those people and helping them get into that direction, pointing them in the right direction. And then we're very thankful that they're coming back, taking our exams, and they're working for us. And again, these are local people that know our community and come from our community.
So there have also been a lot of questions with regards to use of force policies, and I know that you said that they're posted online. Can you elaborate on the types of trainings you undergo for de-escalation and give some examples of recent cases of how it was used?
Sure, I'm going to defer to Mark Chambers, who is one of our training officers and has been certified as a trainer in the state. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark and let Mark answer that.
Oh, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Anita. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
After all those wonderful internet issues that we had earlier. So I've been teaching use of force in the town of Westford for 20 years, and I've been able to help shape our program here. But one of the things that is really good about Massachusetts is they stay on the tip of trends, and they want to make sure that we're addressing issues as they come up. Governor Baker actually, and the Mass Chiefs of Police had added the de-escalation training, recognizing mental health and dealing with mental health issues to part of the curriculum 2 or 3 years ago now. So once they see an issue that's starting to pop up that they believe that additional police training should be provided on, they really do a good job of trying to push it through the state. So the governing agency for police agencies here, the governing body for police training here in Massachusetts is the Municipal Police Training Committee. And through them, they set the curriculum for all basic recruit officers. And I know that the big question nowadays is de-escalation and what types of training that we have and we receive as police officers. It starts from day one when the officers go into the police academy, and it's mentioned in a very extensive module called Who We Are. As police officers in Massachusetts, there's certain standards that are expected to be met, and I think that it's pretty elaborate training that we undergo here in Massachusetts. So from day one, we start getting indoctrinated with de-escalation tactics. It goes through the academy. It's part of their communication skills module. It's part of their mental illness module. It's part of our use of force module. It's part of our applied patrol procedures. And what applied patrol procedures is, essentially, it's scenario-based training that ranges from something as simple as a motor vehicle stop to a full-on domestic where the recruit officers are required to use force or de-escalate a situation. And all of those scenario-based trainings are graded on how the officers do and whether they're responding appropriately, not just within their use of force, but as using their de-escalation techniques, which starts with basic things as making sure that you maintain distance, the cadence and tone of your voice, the volume of your voice, your body language, maintaining eye contact, speaking softly when people start to yell because they have a tendency to quiet down a little bit because they want to be able to hear what you're saying. Once they get through that and they graduate through the police academy, the training doesn't stop. The municipal agencies are now expected to take over those types of trainings. And we do that here in Westford, and we do it 3 or 4 times a year when we do our firearms and defensive tactics training. We try to build in scenarios where myself and the 2 other instructors will kind of evolve the scenario based upon the behavior and how the officers are doing, because we want to make sure that they're using their command presence, that they're using proper verbal tactics, and that they're maintaining their distance and using their proper defensive tactics. And if they do all of those, they're able to de-escalate a situation. So we really try to reinforce that. And then we also have policies, as if anybody had paid attention when we put out the updated use of force policy, we really wanted to make sure that we're documenting our de-escalation practices like we have. We've always had in place since I've been one of the instructors, and we wanted to more thoroughly document our training practices here. So we go over our use of force policy every time that we do those types of training. And as being an accredited agency, there's some standards that we have to go over annually. Others are recommended more often, and de-escalation and use of force is one of those that we take very seriously here, and we make sure that our officers are very well versed in the use of force policy, as well as the use of force continuum that is practiced and taught here in Massachusetts. So it's not something that gets put by the wayside. It's enhanced and reinforced throughout our entire training regimen, as well as our policies. You know, being an accredited agency really means that we have to stay on top of our policies and make sure that our officers are following them. And through our supervisors and through our trainers here at the police department, I think that our guys really get a lot of good quality training, so that way they can address these. And you know, we generally don't hear much about these types of issues. So hopefully that answers your question on de-escalation.
Do you have an example you might be able to share with us? I'm not sure if there's one.
Yeah, so de-escalation, you know, it's not just being able to talk people into doing something that they don't want to do. You have to be a very good communicator to be able to accomplish that, especially when people don't want to be arrested or be placed under control. So a couple of the issues, I know the selectmen have been aware of some of these over the past several years, where we actually had a couple of officers that were recognized for their ability to kind of go up and go down the use of force continuum, which to us is part of the de-escalation. Recognizing where you are and what a reasonable use of force would be, and having confidence in your own skills in order to take control of the situation. We had a moving domestic violence situation where a young lady was actually kidnapped by her boyfriend and her ex-boyfriend, and was going down the road, and she was lucky enough that she could get her head out the window and make some noise, and our officers heard it and responded. Were able to stop the car, ordered the subject out of the car, and he was yelling for them to shoot him. Our officers had time, distance, and cover, all elements of de-escalation tactics, and were able to determine just through patience and those de-escalation tactics that he did not have a firearm. He tried to run away, and as our officers chased him, he turned around and picked up a 2x4 off the side of the road. Luckily, one of our officers is fairly confident in his ground skills, and took the subject to the ground and was able to place him in handcuffs. And no one sustained any injuries. So proper use of de-escalation tactics and knowing where you are on the use of force continuum really helps our officers bring some of these events under control without having to use an unnecessary level of force. We also had an officer where we had a domestic violence situation where the suspect was holding the female down with a knife to her throat and threatening her life. And when our officers walked in the door, the subject came out right in front of the officers in the doorway, and both the officers were able to grab the suspect's arms, disarm him, take him to the ground, put him in handcuffs. So just, it's simple things like that that they're able to recognize where they can bring these situations, and they come in a little bit less than maybe what other people would do, because they believe in de-escalation. They know where they fall in the use of force curriculum and continuum, and they respond appropriately. So those are the most recent examples that I can think of. We've had, I know that I was talking to the chief earlier about this, but we've had tasers for about 3.5 years. The first time we used a taser was about 4 months ago, and the chief and I were both actually on that call because it was a very, very tense, very rapidly evolving, pretty scary call. But that was the first time we had to use tasers, and we've tried everything within our power to de-escalate that situation before we got there. So one other example that I can, if I may real quick, is we had a mid-20s male person that severely autistic and was in crisis, and his father had called us down to his residence to help control him. When our officers showed up, he had a knife in one hand and a hammer in the other. Our officers responded appropriately. One had a taser out, one had a firearm out, but they had their time, distance, and cover, used their voice, used all the training they'd received on how to de-escalate situations and talk to people that are in crisis. And they were able to get him to drop both the hammer and the knife. And once they had enough space and he put those weapons down, our officers holstered their weapons, went in, sat down next to the individual, talked to him calmly, and got him to go out to the ambulance, because it's properly determined to be a medical call when people are in mental health crisis. So I think those are 3 good examples of where our officers have really used their training and used their communication skills to be able to really take a situation on control, where some other place, maybe it probably wouldn't have happened as well, and it could have ended much, much poorly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And the last question, at least in this section, is about accountability. And can you talk about how the Westford Police Department is held accountable to the public?
Sure. If we receive a complaint, it's fully investigated. A person can file a complaint with us in person, call us, we will investigate it. And then we actually make them aware of where the investigation is, or the outcome of the investigation. I will tell you what we also do is I notify the town manager immediately of any complaints that we received, the good and the bad. The manager is aware of all of that information. And if these things are investigated and we find that the officer did something inappropriately or wrong, we take the necessary disciplinary action against them.
And can you describe the process for a resident filing a complaint, what that looks like?
Absolutely. We actually posted that online for people to review. They can go to our website and get a copy of the complaint form. But it just doesn't end there. If people are not comfortable coming into the police department, they can call and speak with one of the command officers, either myself or Deputy Chief Chambers, and then we follow up on every single complaint that we receive.
Okay, great. So I know a lot of questions and stuff have been coming in through the questions box, but we did want to shift over to personal accounts from the community, and I was going to pass it over to Emily Gilstrap with Indivisible. That's okay? Okay.
Hi, thank you. We've been reaching out to communities of color in Westford to try to understand and bring to light the experiences that they have in our community, in our neighborhoods, in our institutions. So I want to acknowledge that these accounts aren't representative of everyone's experience. And we also want to recognize that the nature of their anonymity makes it hard to necessarily respond to them directly. But that being said, we collectively, we've heard from people who have felt targeted by the police or by their neighbors in other situations. So I just want to share a few examples with you. We've heard from drivers who were pulled over frequently within a short period of time, people of color, and we heard from one business owner that their employee, who was a delivery person and a person of color, was pulled over so many times in the course of their work that it interfered with their job, and they felt targeted and eventually quit, allegedly as a result of that. We also heard from a resident who is raising a family here in Westford, and she described an experience that her husband had. He's a Black man, and when they first moved here several years ago, a Westford police officer followed him a long way through town before pulling him over. He asked why he was being pulled over, and the officer responded that he didn't have a right to ask that. The officer ultimately revealed that it was for a burnt out license plate light. During their interaction, the officer also said, "You don't talk when I am talking." So this gentleman knew he had a right to ask why he was pulled over. He felt that someone else might have been less likely to be pulled over for such a minor thing, and also he felt he was treated disrespectfully, where a white person might not have been treated that way. So I want to give you a chief or deputy chief a chance to react to those stories and tell us, you've told us how someone should file a complaint, but I guess my follow-up question would be how can we encourage those people to trust that process so they feel comfortable coming forward with those complaints?
Well, like I said, every complaint gets followed up, Emily. What I can tell you is the first instance where the person was pulled over several times, I don't know if this was in Westford. We didn't receive any complaints on that individual or from that individual. That doesn't ring any bells with me. But I want to remind you, he could be a horrible driver as well and get pulled over several times. And I hope my officers, we encourage our officers to enforce all the laws. But with something like the second instance where somebody says you don't have a right to talk to me, that's basic rudeness on the officer's part. If somebody feels uncomfortable with how they were handled, we want to hear about it. We want to know about it. What I can tell you is we would deal with something like that. We have received zero complaints, formal complaints from the public about racial profiling, but we do receive informal inquiries from somebody that just wants to know. And I know Deputy Chief Chambers has sat down with a couple of individuals who felt that they were profiled because of the color of their skin. And Deputy Chief Chambers sat down with the individual and explained to him our procedures and why and how things happened and why it happened in a certain way. So we do take those issues very, very serious. And the other thing that I do want to say is, did you say the person was followed out of town or followed
through town? I think they told me, they're followed basically from Abbott School to Oak Hill Road, roughly.
Yeah, so if something like that, we encourage people to ask for, why are they being pulled over? We encourage that rapport. It gives us the opportunity to say, explain to the motorist what's going on, why you're being stopped. The officer should be doing that in the first place, and start the conversation. Do you know why you're being stopped? I'm stopping you for this reason. So if that didn't happen, that should have happened. So, but I do want to say that, looking at our statistical information in Westford, we go back, and I provided this information to Tom Clay. We went back 10 years, and statistically, we've cited over 37,884 citations over the last 10 years. And that includes warnings, Tom, and that was one of your questions earlier. In the breakdown, when we looked at those citations, we look at where they fall. So we do check this in our racial profiling and bias to make sure that our officers are doing their job and we're within their numbers. And what we found out of those 37,884 citations were 82% of those citations were issued to white people, 4.8% were Asian, and 3.3% were African American. That falls in line with the racial profiling bill that was created in the Acts of 2000, Chapter 228 in August of 2000. So since 2000, they established a racial profiling and gender law. And that law basically says it collects data from every police department in the state. And it is forwarded to the executive officer of public safety. The data is captured by the registry of motor vehicles on citations, and it captures a person's race on there. And what happens as a result of that, if there are any anomalies with the motoring public or that are like off the charts or something that brings some, raises some concerns, then that community then receives a notification from the registry of motor vehicles or the executive office of public safety that there is there could be a problem there. And that alerts the community. And since that law has been enacted, we have received zero notifications from the registry of any anomalies or anything that are out of line. We also, like I said, we do take a look at the individual officers' citations and where they fall, because we do track that internally. And that's based, I just went back 10 years. So we fall right in where we should be. And we have never received any notifications from the state that there have been any problems with the Westford Police Department. And I believe it was in 2014, there was a Supreme Court case that really addressed this. And the case actually looked at all 366 communities. And out of the 366 communities, there were almost 240 something or so communities that did have anomalies with them. So they did have problems and they were notified. We were not one of those, and we have never been one since they enacted this law. So I think that's important to know.
Could you please describe the current training provided to Westford Police Department staff to address implicit bias, and speak to how you ensure these trainings are put into practice?
Perfect cue, Mark. Great job. You came in right on the training question.
Yeah, I don't want to eat up too much bandwidth. We got to get on Mike Wells to improve it over here. So again, with the training, it starts with the police academy. The MPTC really did a good job of rewriting their training curriculum a couple years ago. They met with a bunch of the mass police chiefs and a lot of kind of the civil liberties activists, just to come up with changes within the curriculum to address this. Even when I went to the police academy 22 years ago, this was a big issue. We wanted to make sure that everybody was doing everything right and making sure that we weren't violating anybody's rights, and that we were doing it the right way, just based upon the violation and not having anything to do with somebody's the color of somebody's skin. So implicit bias training does start very early. Again, in the police academy, it's part of the MPTC recruit curriculum. Implicit bias, explicit bias, cultural bias. So they try to touch on the topic and make sure that everybody is very aware of it. They also do personality profiles in the police academy to see, to kind of point out some shortcomings that an officer may have, and make them aware of it, so that way they can take steps to work around it, to make sure that they're addressing it and make sure that it doesn't creep into their work. And hopefully, over the course of months and years, that bias goes away. Again, for the Westford Police Department staff, we make sure that we are on top of them. We have excellent supervisors that try to keep track of our officer citations, the calls they're on. We encourage our road sergeants to respond to calls for service to make sure that our officers are handling it in an appropriate way. And then we also do in-house training as well as in-service training. So every year, each officer has to attend 40 hours of in-service training, and the Municipal Police Training Committee comes up with the curriculum. And every year there is a formal component for implicit bias training, as well as us being the accredited agency. We go through our racial and gender profiling policy every year, as well as doing implicit bias training that I think usually we complete it in April. between April and July, because we want to make sure that we keep it on our officers' radar, because this stuff does creep in with the amount, depending on news sources and what you read and what you watch. Sometimes you can be influenced without even really being aware of it. So we really try to stay on top of our officers to make sure that they're looking at their own implicit bias and try to approach everything as fairly and impartially as possible. If I just want to go back to the complaint process. Just one thing that I just wanted to point out about that is we do consider informal complaints. So when we do hear about these types of incidents, we do try to look into them. However, with anonymous complaints, it's very difficult because you're only getting one side of the story and you may not have enough information to really do anything with. But when it's a matter of concern, we generally will poke around and see if it rings a bell with anybody, so that way we can address it. Sometimes just the story of what we've heard getting around kind of has our guys making sure, keeps them on their toes as well. But we haven't received any official complaints. But I would say that if there's concern because you're intimidated by police officers, which we know that is out there, a simple phone call or an email to our the chief's email, which forwards it to within the police department, we will look into it. We do have an anonymous tip line. Unfortunately, I don't have the phone number in front of me, but we do have it available. It doesn't have to just be a formal thing where you file a formal complaint. We can have an informal conversation where we can discuss what happened, and maybe we can provide you with information, or you can provide us with information, so that way we can properly follow it up. But just trying to get people comfortable with us as much as possible and communicate, I think, is the best way that we can try to address this moving forward. Where if we don't know about it, we can't do anything about it.
And Emily, I'd like to just add one other thing. As far as our new officers go, I know Mark kind of touched upon it, but it's a 26-week academy. It's one of the longest academies, I think, in the nation. And prior to getting into that academy, all officers are medically tested and psychologically have a psychological exam done as well. So it is a pretty intense and long process to go through before you get hired here.
Thank you. Moving on to one more community story. So the same gentleman that I referred to earlier that had been followed through town when they first moved here also had an experience where a neighbor called the police on him when he was driving home. Again, I don't have a lot of details there, but he was just simply driving home. We know that records indicate some similar instances of members of the community calling in to report someone looking out of place, when it may really be a reflection of their own racial bias. So, out of what we've shared is just a sample of the accounts that we've heard that suggest that we need to build trust around issues of racial bias in Westford. People of color in our community and visitors as well should feel that they can go about their day-to-day lives, enjoy our beaches, walk around, or just go home, drive home. They should be able to do that just as anyone else would. So are there guidelines for the community on when it's appropriate and not appropriate to call the police? And what can you do to broadcast that guidance and maybe, in a sense, demonstrate leadership against racial bias?
So we've discussed this quite a bit lately, and we've had several instances where people have called the department and had said, they just, can you send somebody down there? They look out of place. And what we have done and what we're in the process of doing is actually coming up with another policy that actually helps dispatch. That's the point where the calls come into, actually drill down on more information. Because simply if somebody is of a different race, there has to be, that isn't the reason why you're sending a police officer down there. And because, everyone's welcome in this community. I believe that's that's on the sign at the First Parish Church. I remember this, Tom, when you and I had our discussion earlier, all are welcome. And I believe in that. And I recently had a discussion with Bob Jeffries when he first moved to town. And Bob actually said that's what the old Chief Cannell had told him back in the day. So I want people to feel welcome in our community, but we do have to do a better job. And as far as what can we do to put information out on what is appropriate to call on, people perceive things differently. And we've seen that in New York recently, where the individual was out bird watching and somebody felt threatened by an African-American who was bird watching and called the police, and actually it was captured on video, that whole incident. So people perceive things differently, and they will add things to it. We had an incident where we were called down to the town beach because people of color were using the beach, and some people down there didn't think they were residents. Well, you don't have to be a resident. And the way the officer handled it, well, I commended the officer and how he handled it. Very delicate situation, but there was a little bit more information that was added to the call. One, they were lighting fires on the beach, which is prohibited, and they were drinking. That is prohibited. But when the officer got there, he didn't see any fires or anybody drinking. So the way the officer handled it is he walked through and spoke with several families to see if there were any problems or if anybody seen any fires. And nobody did. And the way that officer handled it was the right way in handling it. So we do get those calls. I think as a community, we have to be aware of those issues and those biases that people may have. But also at the point when we receive those calls, now the dispatch gets limited information and then passes it on to the police officer. It's incumbent upon that dispatcher to get as much information as possible, so we don't have any instances where an officer is just showing up based on somebody being of a different color.
Emily, it's Jody. May I just add something there?
Mhm.
So that instance that the police chief was just talking about, they actually brought that to my attention, and I actually went down to the beach and met with the residents that were calling the police to come down, and we had a good conversation and talked about appropriate calls to the police department, and the resident then understood why it wasn't appropriate to keep calling when she saw people that she didn't recognize. So the police department did get me involved in that when they received those calls, and I think we took care of it, and it stopped happening. So.
Thank you so much for engaging constructively with those questions. I know we're still getting questions coming in, really great questions, and I think we'll continue to save those for sort of our scheduled live Q&A. Before that, I'm going to pass it off to Tom Clay for talking about SROs.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. One thing we might have mentioned in the beginning is we really appreciate the questions, and the best way for you to make sure your question is acknowledged and read and answered either tonight or in follow-up is to post it as a question as opposed to raising your hand or some of the other things you can do on this tool. So really, if you've got a question, please post it there. There are a bunch of great questions there so far. We'll do our best to get at some of them tonight, but we can already see that there are probably too many to get to all of them. But there are a couple of questions asking, will there be follow-up? If I ask a question here, does it mean anything? Will it get addressed? We will absolutely make sure these questions are posted and do our best to get you the answers for them. So I'm glad there's so much enthusiasm here, and we'll do our best to get as much feedback to you as we possibly can. Bill, I know there's a long conversation that that started and is ongoing in town about the appropriate use of school resource officers or SROs in the schools. And hi, Avery, chair of the school committee. We wanted to give you a chance just to explain some of the basics of how many are there, how are they funded, what role do they have, where are they stationed. So if you could start off, Bill, just by giving us a quick 10-minute overview of just what they do and how many there are and how they fit in and how we pay for them. I think that'll help tee up the conversation.
Yes, thank you. I'll be glad to. There are within the town of Westford 2 school resource officers. There's one at Neshoba Valley Technical High School. Now, as many people know, that is a separate school district from the Westford Public Schools and not under my jurisdiction as the superintendent of the Westford Public Schools. We have one school resource officer at Westford Academy, Officer Pravau. It's important for me to state that not everyone who is interested in being a school resource officer and applies in Westford is hired as a school resource officer. They have to have sound professional and interpersonal qualities. We interview them carefully in collaboration with the police department, police chief, to look for a person who listens, is a great listener, is a problem solver, is willing to understand what the real nature of an issue is, so as not to overreact and not to underreact. Some people have the impression that a school resource officer has a sort of a paramilitary presence in the high school, and that's not true. Our school resource officer is a trusted, very trusted adult by both students and staff. He is helpful to everyone, and he works with everyone, including students and staff, to ensure the physical and mental health and well-being of everyone, not only in Westford Academy, but he circulates to our other schools also, so that his primary role is to ensure the safety of the occupants of our school buildings. Now, Officer Pravau has worked with our school safety staff to do some extraordinary training exercises for our staff and for our students that focus on how to handle school emergencies. Because as much as we would like not to see and not to recognize those things that happen in society, they do happen. And they can happen in Westford. We want to make sure our students and our staff are prepared as well as possible to address those issues and how to evacuate a building, how to address certain issues. Officer Pravau worked with myself and the high school administration and our school safety officer 2 years ago. The school committee participated in this particular day during the summer to do a full exercise, a day-long exercise of an actual simulated event, emergency event, that involved the evacuation of a building to a rally point and then to a reunification point. And what would that process look like in terms of how do we deal with the media? How do we move students? How do we transport them quickly? How do we make sure that they move to a safe spot and are transported to a reunification spot? And what is it that we need to do to make sure that those students are orderly and safely returned to their parents? What is it that we require from the parents for documentation? So there's a lot that goes into it. He also oversaw a tabletop exercise in which the police department and the fire department participated with us this current year on simulated school emergencies. But getting back to his interaction with students and staff, we have staff members who have written to us indicating how safe they feel with the SRO in the school system, particularly at Westford Academy. The fact that students often will approach Officer Pravau and talk to him about the well-being of friends. Sometimes students are very concerned. They care deeply about each other, as we all know. Those of us who have had high school students, they care very deeply about each other and are committed to each other's well-being. And sometimes they do speak to Officer Pravau about someone who is into some degree of substance abuse, and Officer Pravau will work very closely with students, with the families involved, with the school administration, to try and address that situation with mental health officials also, and our guidance staff and our social worker to the greatest extent possible. He holds some teaching and talking sessions with students. Those of you who have students that either have attended Westford Academy or will attend will find that criminal justice courses and forensic courses are very popular with the students. And Officer Praval plays a very integral role in talking with students about the process of forensic investigations and the criminal justice process, and what represents sound professional criminal justice practice and what doesn't represent that. He sometimes is involved in investigations. If we have students, and as much as we hate to think about it, there are students who do bring from time to time illegal substances to schools, and we have to follow up on those and deal with it appropriately. Since we are rated as one of the top, if not the top school system in Massachusetts, we have a lot of people who would like to illegally enroll their children in the Westford Public Schools. And there are numerous times during the year where we will ask Officer Praval to go out to a home, some residents, and investigate whether or not a family is actually living there and living there legally. Because and as I say, I hate to say it, at least a half a dozen times a year, we find people from over the border or from another community in Massachusetts who are dropping their children off at bus stops at the extremes of the town, and they're claiming that they are residents of Westford when they're not. So that's a particularly challenging aspect of the job. But he is always planning and implementing ways to improve the well-being for students and staff, and reflecting on it and revising our procedures and our policies. His job, and he understands it well, because he's a professional and he's a terrific human being, is to protect the community and not to divide the community. Not only the greater Westford community, but also the school system, our school family. And so I can't say anything but great things about our school resource officer. He's not an individual who walks around the school with his hand on his gun all day. That's not the case. Okay, he is available for counseling, for talking, for working with law enforcement agencies on our training, working with our school staff in terms of the mental health and well-being of both our students and our staff. He also works very importantly with families on the aspect of social host liability to make sure that families do not wind up in problems as a result of underage students drinking or abusing controlled substances on their property. So I can only say good things about our school resource officer, because he is involved with lots of very good training and good advice for students and staff, and great service to not only the school system but the community.
I think that does a good job answering most of the prepared questions.
Yep.
A couple fact questions. You mentioned there are two in town. Neshoba Tech, that school district does reimburse the town for the SRO station there, and the budget for the SRO station at Westford Academy is, my understanding, it's mostly paid for out of the school budget, and there's a small portion or a portion that's paid out of the town budget.
Yes, primarily out of the school budget.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. I know there's some questions related to this, but I think, Anita, you wanted to hold the questions primarily to the end. So if that's the case, do you want to go ahead and proceed to the next section, and then we'll come back and answer all the questions at once?
Yeah, well, actually, we were going to see if we could address some of the questions right now, but as we're waiting to unmute a couple of the speakers, I wonder, Mark Chambers, I know, had a note that he wanted to add in just to inform the public about a resource available.
Right. Yeah. So the anonymous tip line that I had referenced earlier for an informal complaint process, I didn't have the number, but luckily we have people listening that are able to find it for me. So the number is 978-399-2072, 399-2072. So that's an anonymous tip line. It's not monitored. Look, it's checked daily, but it's not. If you call, you won't get a person. You'll get a voice service. If you want to leave your contact information, you can, and we'll follow up with you. But I just wanted to throw that number out there as a resource in case somebody wanted to make us aware of something that they would have witnessed that we normally wouldn't know about, and they may not be comfortable speaking with us about. But if they let us know about, we can actually look into it, and we can do that anonymously. The detective lieutenant does monitor that and checks it, and the detective sergeant, if they feel like it's a complaint, it will be forwarded to me for investigation or for distribution.
There are a couple of questions about where the conversation around SRO and school resource officer policy will continue. So maybe Avery, I can ask you if you've got any comments you want to share about sort of how the school committee, looks at this, thinks about it, and sort of where people can go if they have additional questions specific to, how we're doing in the schools related to SROs.
Sure. Thank you. The school committee is happy to take this up at any time. I know we've been talking a lot about it at the safety task force, and it will continue to come up. The committee does understand the need to balance the SRO with the mental health professionals. And so we've looked at multiple models, and I would hope that it will be on an upcoming agenda as it becomes more of a topic through the task force.
And Avery mentions the task force. The select board and the school committee did impanel the town and school safety task force, which has looked both at physical security and emotional well-being, and is preparing a set of recommendations and community conversations around if we were to make a next investment, do we first prioritize additional mental health providers at the younger ages? Do we look at additional SRO coverage as we see sort of the challenges going on continue to move? So that conversation is active, and over the course of the next 3 to 6 months, there'll be some recommendations coming back to the school committee and the select board related to this. So plenty of opportunity for folks to weigh in and
Yes.
and see how this is being considered. Anita, do you want to take a few more questions, or are we ready to move to the next piece?
I think Beth was working to unmute somebody who had a question.
Hi, so I think we'll go with Medha first, and I will unmute her, or if Mike probably can do it faster than I can. And please limit your remarks to just one question because we want to get to, several.
Mayha,
so
you're
unmute.
Yeah, Mayha, you are self-muted. You need to unmute yourself before you can speak. Here we are.
Hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sweet. I just want to ask real quick. So I know there's been a lot of discussion in this nation, in our nation, surrounding the power imbalance table, nature of police being armed. There's already a power with regards to the school resource officer. I feel like this power imbalance is very exaggerated. In Mr. Olson has mentioned a lot of cases in which Officer Pavao has been dealing with mental health issues and students who have mental health issues. I'm just wondering if we as a community can see how introducing a power imbalance with regard to just the fact that a student resource officer is armed, if we can understand how introducing that power imbalance is something that could actually be way more detrimental to the situation, and how social workers and mental health officers, mental health professionals could better handle the situation.
Would you like me to answer that?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I do think that in today's society, first of all, there is a presence for a need for presence of a school resource officer to address the realities of the need to train our students and our staff. Now, with that being said, I do believe that we need to do, along with many other school systems, a more comprehensive job and adopt a more comprehensive approach from a mental health wellness perspective by hiring trained professionals such as adjustment counselors. When I develop the budget, I meet with the staff of every school building after school on a voluntary basis, and a lot of them do show up. It's each one school at a time. And this past year, when I met with them and asked them what are the priority needs that they are experiencing currently and what they see as the emerging needs, at every building, it was the mental health needs of students that need to be addressed. They want more professional development, but even more importantly, they want more professionals in place to be able to address what we see as increasing aberrant behavior of children. Now, that's not a surprise because each year I talk to Chief McEnany about the number of restraining orders between adults in the town of Westford. And those folders, in plural, are growing bigger and bigger all the time because of contentious relationships that do impact students, unfortunately. Do I believe we need to do more in terms of hiring and starting at the elementary level and even before that, at the kindergarten, preschool? Oh, yes, I do. Because those problems just continue to escalate if not addressed effectively. So I think absolutely, Maida, and I enjoyed the conversation we had a few weeks ago with the WPS 8 Can't Wait, and we'll continue that conversation. But I do honestly think in today's day and age, there is the need for both the presence of a school resource officer, particularly at the upper grade levels, but very much a need for increased numbers of mental health professionals to work with our students.
Thanks. Thanks, Bill. We did have one question that came in a few different times in a few different ways from folks, and so I hope I'm not going to butcher the question, but I feel like it goes back to Chief, your remarks about the 3% of folks who were pulled over who are from the Black community versus the 1%, but there's a question about in town here, the Black population in Westford being 1%. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that's not a concern? Because I think there's some confusion about that or just more information that could be shared.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question and a great point. But what it deals with when they start looking at the demographics, we can't do benchmarking demographics within the community. The state uses the benchmarking for our area, which includes the cities of Lowell, Chelmsford, Littleton, within our area, neighboring communities. So they have to look at all of that data as well because of the high volume of traffic that we have through our town. 110 corridor, Route 40 and Boston Road. So they look at a larger pool, just not the data or the demographics from within our community. They have to look at a bigger picture, which includes neighboring communities.
Chief, could you provide us with the figure? I think it was probably last updated in 2004, but that represents that demographic in terms of, commuters coming through and
yeah, I don't know the amount, but I believe there were over 36,000 cars last count just off of Boston Road during the morning commute. So the amount of people that are coming through the town it's a lot through just the Boston Road area. The state does that count. Maybe Paul Sterrett might be able to help us get that information, but we can get that information for you.
Anita, I'll mention that some of the data that the chief is referencing tonight will be in the packet for the select board meeting on the 14th. So if you're interested in just some of the facts and figures that have been reported so far, you'll have a chance to see that in the best form we have it.
Thanks. And Beth, I think there was another person we were going to unmute.
Yes, so I think we're ready for Edith, if we can unmute her.
Okay, that's done. Edith, can you hear us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Edith Jochen-Bly. I was class of 2008 at Westford Academy and went on to Bentley and then to the Brookings Institution, where I was an economist for 3 years. And I'm sorry, I'm forcing myself to de-escalate as I have listened to this conversation. So rather than discuss things that are high level, I will only refer to the latest question that I posed in the chat for transparency. And I do not expect it to be answered today, quite frankly. I came to Westford in August 2001, and despite the pervasive and egregious nature of systemic racism and white privilege in this town, I became an economist at the Brookings Institution in the Global Economy and Development Program. Many times during my life here, I had woefully racist interactions with the Westford Police Department and felt silenced by the culture of Westford, particularly Westford institutions at large, which many of you would have seen the letter that I issued as a response to the first letter that was written after George Floyd's death. I went to Blanchard and Westford Academy just like everybody else. I cannot sit here on this call and just put in questions that are obviously going to go unaddressed because of the obvious white bias of the panel of people. What will be done to diversify this panel and to diversify Westford institutions now and moving forward? Thank you.
Anita, how would you like to respond to that? I know the select board, we are going to do and wrap up some of the discussion about some of the places that communication will happen and some of the opportunities that we as a town and other institutions will have. Do you want to ask Andrea and
more pointedly, I think I have had some discussions with leaders within Westford institutions, most with members of the select board, but have not received any feedback from the town manager, Westford Police Department, Westford Fire, and many other institutions, including Westford Public Schools, which is the most concerning. So to the Westford Police Department and Westford Public Schools, I would be particularly interested to hear the answer. And then any other administrators who would want to respond can also chime in.
Okay, so I think there's a couple. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to say just a couple pieces, to that. So I think the part of the question is, what steps are we taking to diversify this conversation and have communities of color be active and visible in this really important discussion? So I guess the question is to you, Chief, and then to you, Avery and Bill. Sort of how are you looking to engage those communities and bring them into the conversation?
Well, that's what we're doing right now, is I think we're bringing people into the conversation, and we have to start somewhere. Anita and I have talked previously a couple of months ago about exactly this very topic. And we were had some ideas, and I'm looking, and I told Anita that I'm looking for her to help me get to that point. And so we have had those discussions. As far as the schools, Bill?
Well, we are going to start up the diversity and inclusion team in a very active role. What we're looking at is setting the agendas for each month moving forward, and looking very seriously at having not only just members of the public school community, but members of the entire Westford community participate in perhaps even facilitating the conversations each month on different topics that are essential for us to talk about to improve our society from where we are now and where we have been for many years. And Edith, if you're the same person I'm thinking of, and I'm not sure if you are, I remember you well. If I'm thinking of the same person, you happened to speak during a New England Association of School and Colleges review at one point in time talking about how we had interacted, and if I've got the same person correct, that you suggested a course or change, and I was able to implement it for you. And if that's the case, and if you're willing to engage with us again, we'd love to have you run one of the sessions that we're going to be running this year with the diversity inclusion team.
And I just need to say something. And again, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. I'm only speaking on behalf of myself. As a woman of color who lives in Westford, this community conversation is to do just that of trying to start. I know people are like, what is talking going to do? Talking is going to help improve understanding. It's going to help us understand more about the police department, which I don't know very much about, and then they'll hear more from us. They're saying that they haven't heard, and I'm speaking about it like communities of color. I think we are trying to figure out how can we make the process more transparent, more accountable? How can we make it so that people feel welcome or feel comfortable enough to say something? And if it's through coming in different channels, we're going to try and figure that out. I think we need more people to volunteer to help us figure out what the solutions are. And the more people we have sitting at the table who are representing all these different communities that we have in town, the better process we can have. And I'm not speaking directly just to Edith, because I know she's a very brave voice who came on this call and exposed herself and is speaking on behalf of, I'm sure, a lot of people who have a similar perspective. But I think we need to do it by talking to each other and then figuring out what the solutions are and figuring out together, so then we can make this a better place and that we can solve problems. I don't think it's going to be overnight. It's going to take a really long time, and people have to be patient and work with us, right? And that's just I'm only speaking on behalf of myself and not on the select board. Just need to say that.
I'd love to chime in as well. Edith, thank you so much for coming on this call. It was very brave, and obviously this affected you deeply and personally, these experiences, and I'm sorry. And, you know, the stories I presented anonymously might be easier to dismiss. And so that's why it was so important to be, you know, to have your voice here tonight. And I think it's really important that we are not dismissive of these experiences. Thank you.
May I say something?
Go ahead, Jody.
Yes, so Edith, I would love to sit down and talk to you anytime and hear your story and get your ideas. I have not heard your specific story. I don't believe we've met, but I agree with everything Anita said, and I am open to improving anything that we do. So let's get moving on it.
So I think we have time for like one more question or account to come in through. And Beth, oops, okay, because we're not sure whether or not folks are comfortable with speaking in a very public forum. Well, we can always come back to this if we have time. You know, and again, I know we did have a lot of questions that came in through this chat and also through the Google form that we had kind of leading up to this forum, which is still open. And again, we're going to forward all of these questions over to the police department. We're going to figure out the best way to answer them, if it's through just email or if it's through maybe video or something, depending on what the answers are and how elaborate they are. But we're going to pause the Q&A for now, and then I'm going to pass things over to Beth Schaefer Morrison with Indivisible to talk about activity that's happening at the state level.
Hello, can y'all hear me all right? So I wanted to highlight a bill that was just proposed in the Massachusetts State Senate yesterday. And it's Bill S2800, and it's an act to reform police standards and shift resources to build a more equitable, fair, and just Commonwealth that values Black lives and communities of color. So I encourage you all to look into this bill. We're going to post it on the website, and then share your concerns with your state representative and your state senator and encourage them to support this legislation that would have some really key things that would help move our state along, such as certifying police, having a process to decertify police if there are issues with disciplinary issues. And also it would limit qualified immunity, and also look at other, set up some commissions to look at other ways that we can look at rectifying systemic inequality in our state. So again, it's Bill S2800, and you can find it on malegislature.gov, and we're also going to post it on our website.
Anita, is there time for more questions from the list?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we're going to have an overview of the town's next steps, but I feel like we should probably save that for last. So we do have time here.
There's just so many questions that have come in, so I thought we could knock a few more out. So let me see. There's one of the questions, I guess, is kind of around transparency of, okay, let me just read the question. What is the process when a complaint or disciplinary action is brought against an officer at Westford Police Department? Do these actions get purged from their records? Is there language in police contracts that prevent them from being disciplined for certain actions? So I guess it's just a question around if they have complaints, what happens, and do they stay on the force?
So, yeah, thank you for the question. And how that works is any complaint that comes in gets investigated. If they're investigated, if there's merit to the case, that becomes a part of their permanent record. It does not get expunged, does not go away with somebody. There is nothing in the contracts that say that gets removed from their record either. So we keep that as part of their permanent record. I will tell you, what the department has, we do receive complaints on officers. One of the most recent complaints that we did receive was that a police officer waved at a citizen, and we had to investigate it.
Could I say something too? We've had very few complaints over my 12 years here against the police department. We've had a couple of internal issues, and the police union has completely supported the discipline when we felt it necessary. So I think that's, they want cops that follow the rules and do the right thing on the force. And if there's been any case, and it's not been anything like excessive force, it's been more internal administrative type issues, but our police unions have fully supported the discipline that the chief has suggested and that I have upheld. So they've been very supportive of that.
Okay. I'd like to do one more. As a questioner asked, you mentioned a mental health module in training. Can you elaborate on whether there is a module that focuses on special needs children and adults? And in line with that, another person asked, what do you think of non-armed personnel handling such situations, especially with children? Nobody wants a weapon drawn on in the presence of a child. And also, someone points out, isn't the presence of a weapon an escalation in itself? Any thoughts on that?
Well, the presence of a weapon doesn't necessarily escalate the situation unless somebody gets fixated on it. I think our officers do a really good job of controlling their body language and their hand gestures to make sure that they're not calling attention to the fact that they're armed. But the fact of the matter is that any call that a police officer is on, there is a gun involved, and we can't necessarily control everybody's reactions. It's the uniform intimidates people as well. So it's all kind of in the eye of the beholder, and we do our best to make sure that we put people at ease whenever we can. Again, it goes back to the communication skills that start for our officers within the police academy. That mental health, mental illness and emotional disturbances training curriculum is 231 pages long. And they do a good job of trying to specify the exact, some of the exact types of crisis that we may experience, including how to deal with children with special needs and how to speak to them. And again, the cadence of your voice, your volume, the word choice, how you choose to present your questions to them, whether or not you should close the distance, that way you can act more friendly, and or whether or not you should keep your distance because they have proximity aversions. So they really do a good job with recruit officers, trying to expose them to as much as possible. I don't think a lot of people understand the amount of information that police officers are required to have available at their fingertips at all times. Most of our officers do have advanced degrees, both bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and some of our officers do have associate degrees or military training, so they have good experience in dealing with different issues. But it's hard to be able to address every single issue, but they sure do. They sure give it a go. And we try to periodically train our officers in all these different aspects, so that way we can deliver the best service that we can to this community. The chief had mentioned 82% of our officers, 83% of our officers at the beginning of this conversation grew up in this town. And I think that's one of the things that really brings ownership to this police department and how we deal with our community. I know that we have 30,000 plus interactions a year with children, adults, seniors. We're occasionally going to miss the mark, and we apologize for those. And all we can say is that we'll try and do better. And we try to address things as they come up.
I'd just like to mention too that I don't believe any of our police officers have pulled a weapon on a person in over 50 years. So I think people, and there are things that happen in our community. Our selectmen certainly know that, and some of our residents know that, but I don't believe a gun has been pulled on an individual in over 50 years.
So I can address that. We have withdrawn our firearms and pointed them at people when it was appropriate, end of car chases, for robberies, etc. We have not discharged a firearm at a person. I believe the last time there was an officer-involved shooting was Officer McGregor back in the mid-'80s, in the 70s. So we've had zero complaints of use of force, official complaints for use of force, and we received zero official complaints for racial profiling. So we're always willing to take a look at ourselves and try and do better. But again, we can't address what we're not aware of. So it's the first step, and we're doing our best to address all the issues that we can.
And Emily, I would definitely like to just chime in if I can. And it's important to mention this. When we deal with somebody that's in crisis, that has a mental illness, and that is in crisis, we treat every one of those calls as a medical, not as a crime, but as a medical, to get them the help that they need. The Westford Fire Department is brought into play. The paramedics that come down and do an assessment, and we transport them. The other thing that I would definitely like to mention is we were kind of early on, before people were jumping on about having counselors available for people that were in crisis. We joined a consortium of communities within the Air District community of 10 towns. It's called the COIN program, and it's based out of Pepperell PD. And what we use that consortium for is people that are in crisis. It's a master's level clinician that deal with people with mental health issues. They also have a recovery coach that we include with people that have drug and alcohol that need drug and alcohol counseling. They also have a counselor in training as another resource. So before we try to introduce people into the criminal justice system, if we try to get them the help that they need. I think that's an important fact. And the other important fact is the mental health. We always get this question is, how come the police are dealing with mental health issues? That's a legitimate question, but the answer is it's in the law. Under Chapter 123, Section 12, it requires police officers. Now, I would like to see paramedics involved in that and make those assessments, because it's a higher level of care that these individuals are getting when we introduce a paramedic into it. Some communities may treat that as a police call. Our community treats that as a medical call, and that's a very important distinction to make.
Yep, Bill.
I think it would be very helpful, Tom and Mark, if we were to sit down with some of our special education professionals from time to time, and not talk about students, but talk about some of the research that is out there in terms of working with students and how to de-escalate situations, because we're dealing with this every day of the school year, particularly with some students who have severe autism, and things such as positioning, such as verbal cues, proximity, even touching, putting a hand on someone that may have an adverse reaction. So I would love to have the opportunity to have some of your officers and some of our professional staff work together from time to time to talk about what we observe in terms of effective practices in working with children or even adults with disabilities.
Absolutely, Bill. We can make that happen.
Terrific.
Anita, I know we're getting close on time. I just want to acknowledge Mike Wells made a comment that there are a bunch of people with questions and a bunch of people waiting to have their questions answered. And I know we won't be able to get them all tonight. I think the intent is to post the questions and the answers as we're able to develop those on the website that was part of this event. So is that, Anita, is that the right place for people to look for follow-up if they post a question and they don't hear the answer tonight?
Yeah, and there are a lot of questions. Again, we had over 109 that came in a little bit before the forum, and I'm sure there's going to be more, Amy, because of from the national forum itself. So I assume it's going to kind of be in phases. I don't know how long it's going to take the police to get through them, but we will, and we're going to send them on, and we're going to post them or figure it out if it's through video or email. But yeah, that's the best place to go. So we're going to pass things over to Andrea Perner-Sweet, who's the chair of the select board, talk about some next steps.
Thank you, Anita. Oops, I think I'm on mute.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Anita. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Tom, Anita, and Emily for facilitating this forum tonight. And I also want to thank Indivisible Westford and the Social Justice Action Committee of the, I hope I got that right, of the First Parish Church for sponsoring this. I'd also like to thank Chief McEnany and Deputy Chief Chambers, as well as Superintendent Olson for participating tonight and for particularly their behind-the-scene works in gathering information, data, and policies for all of us tonight to start to review and to discuss. So thank you to all of you for what I believe is simply the beginning of a discussion and a conversation with the whole community at large. The select board started talking about this at our June 9th select board meeting. We had a further discussion about it at our June 23rd meeting, and we are going to follow up. This will be on our July 14th meeting to actually begin to talk about next steps and actions that we can take as we move forward to address, issues of racism, of discrimination, of xenophobia, of bullying, of hatred, all things that occur in our community. We started tonight with a forum and a conversation with the police department, but that is, as I said, just a beginning. These are issues that cross our entire community. In order for this to be effective, in order for us to come up with actions that are really going to be meaningful and that take a difference and that make a difference, the board wants to encourage, everyone in this community from, all constituents, all parts of the community, no matter the color of your skin, your gender identity, whether you are young, whether you are old. We encourage all of you to participate in this conversation, because that is the only way that we are going to learn from one another. That is the only way we're going to be able to understand one another. And that is the only way that we are going to be able to make real change in the community. So the discussion continues at July 14th, on July 14th. One other thing I just want to point out, which really does show how interested and committed people are in this community to participating. We had at the height 111 people on this community forum. I do believe that that is the highest participation that we have had in any community meeting that we have held by Zoom. 100 of those people were community and residents. 16 of them are town officials. So I think that indicates the interest and the commitment of the town to do this work. And it is my hope that that kind of commitment and participation is going to continue as we move forward. One other thing that I throw this out as suggestions, as we talk about how to answer the 100+ questions that have come in both before and after. I know we're going to post this on westfordjustice.org. I think perhaps we should also consider whether there are other places we post these questions, or whether we really might want to think about creating an FAQ section on the town website or on the police website that answers some of the questions that are being raised most often, so that there is a place that people can go to get the answers to these questions and to see the answers. In addition, the policies that have been discussed are already posted on westfordjustice.org. I believe they're also posted on the town website. They will be in the select board's packets. So if you go to the select board and our agenda and our packets, you'll find them there as well. And I would just like to conclude to say I really encourage and hope that everybody will continue to participate in this incredibly important discussion that we are having and as we move forward. So once again, thank you to all of you who have organized this and put this on tonight.
Great. So we're over time. Thank you to everyone who's stayed on and everyone who's been part of this. Andrea already did all the thank yous, but thank you to the police, First Parish Church, Indivisible Westford, Westford Cat. Thank you everyone for your time tonight and the energy to, on this forum and to develop it. So I hope everyone has a good night, and we'll talk again soon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Great conversation.